Hello, I'm Matt Brooks. I guess welcome to my presentation. I'm going to talk about GraphQL and FreePBX. A little bit about me: I'm a senior software engineer at Sangoma, and specifically, I work on the PBExact cloud team. And so, I'm just going to talk mainly about like some of the ways we use GraphQL and other things like that. So a little bit about GraphQL, and I'm probably going to say this just because GraphQL is pretty deep in what it can do. So I'm just going to try to go over like the basics in case you're just unfamiliar with what GraphQL. But the point of this lecture isn't to go into every single thing that GraphQL can do, but try to get you like just a basic like knowledge to get started. But GraphQL is basically a query language. It's a lot like SQL, only for web services, if you're familiar with SQL. And basically you can execute queries over APIs. But it was basically originally created at Facebook in 2012 to fulfill a need of like basically the problem was the RESTful APIs that they had were they were unable to like trim down the queries so that they can get more specific data into like a single transaction. So they're trying to like cut down some of the back and forth that the APIs had to do in the multiple requests. And so GraphQL came out of that problem. And then in 2015, Facebook created an open standard around it. And there's just it's kind of exploded since then. Let's see. So really, GraphQL can be kind of summed up in this. You basically tell it what you want, and it will return what you tell it, whatever you're doing. And like an example of this is like over here where you've got the query where you're doing me and name, and then this is what you send to the GraphQL server, and then it would produce something like me, and then the name's Luke Skywalker. And kind of like to show kind of the differences explained within burgers, like RESTful web services, you just request a burger and it gives you a burger with no customization. GraphQL can let you get pretty fancy with it and tell it what kind of burger you want. In this case, you have the bun, the patty, and the bun, and then the lettuce on the bottom. So that's kind of like just the characterization of the differences between them. So as far as FreePBX is concerned, we introduced support for GraphQL in FreePBX 15. We don't have full support, but after I guess the past 2 years, we've added about 90 GraphQL APIs, and that's across 13 of the modules that we currently have with FreePBX. And so it's gradually becoming very robust. FreePBX APIs are still mostly a work in progress, and they're kind of subject to change too. I would say we don't change the APIs very often, but most of the stuff that we do is just trying to keep them consistent and fixing some of the, sometimes when we have APIs that are just named weird or something like that, we'll try to rename them so that it makes sense. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're working with them. Sangoma adds support for new APIs almost on a daily basis, it seems. And we kind of go on like which APIs are more likely to be used, and that's kind of like what dictates which ones we go and create. So at Sangoma, we use them. We're actually like a user of the GraphQL APIs, and they're very well maintained. I just want to say that right now, like it's a very well maintained feature of FreePBX, and it will continue to be maintained for the foreseeable future because we are using them to manage some of our FreePBX instances that we have running in the cloud here. And then that also allows us to have some real world testing scenarios and actually see how the API will perform on real functioning systems. So it's becoming a very, very stable platform for interacting with your FreePBX instance. So how do we use it? So specifically, we use them to provision new PBExact cloud instances. So when a new instance is spun up for the first time, we'll go connect to it and write down the instance specific information such as SIP station logins, stuff like that. We also perform maintenance and upgrades with it. So to keep all the systems up to date, we'll go and schedule out maintenances and then issue those maintenances in kind of a scheduled way. It also helps us edit the health of an instance, so we can see what if the instance is working okay, like if it's responding fine, and then as well as some other things. So why did we choose it? Well, so previous integrations that we used to have relied on modifying config files, SQL, and FW console commands. The problem, while this worked very well, the problem is like between versions, the config files, basically how the SQL is laid out, the config files, stuff like that, that's all subject to change. And so what GraphQL actually allows us to do is allows us to maintain compatibility throughout updates. So like the FreePBX config files in SQL can go change, and then the APIs themselves will not change. So, we can change any of the core underlying features and then still have a functioning thing. And this lets us upgrade into the future without having to do a whole lot of work. So here, I'm just going to go over a quick overview of kind of like some of the APIs. And so most of the APIs can be found on the wiki, and I'll just go ahead and open this. And you can kind of see, like, we've got them broken down, like a list of it. If you go to the wiki, and each one of these is kind of broken down by module as well. So if you want to go into the backup module, you can see that we've got APIs for add backup, update backup, delete backup, restore, fetch all the backup configurations and files. So like, if you just were to drill down, you can kind of see the options that are available to you on the API. And then it's also got some query examples. So you come here, you can see what you would have to send to GraphQL in order to add a backup. And then you can actually see the response. So it gives you kind of an understanding of how that kind of works. And we've got the same thing for a lot of these, like certificate management, core modules. And by the way, core is kind of like the asterisk module. It should probably be named asterisk, but it's basically the core asterisk features. And like it can do stuff like create extension, update extension, delete them. You can get a range of extensions. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do around that. We've got the endpoint, which is a commercial module, which allows you to do some various features like enable DPMA, update the EPM global config, and stuff like that. File store, which lets you configure FTP instances, S3 instances, and other things to let you do off-server storage for FreePBX. There's also firewall rules that you can add, so you can enable the firewall and also add things to the whitelist, the blacklist, and all sorts of stuff. There's also some built-in things for framework, which lets you do tasks like installing a module, uninstalling a module, upgrading modules, fetch asterisk details. There's and things like that. PM2, which lets you see the status of the PM2 applications, which PM2 is kind of like an application server. If you know, it's kind of like Apache for FreePBX has both like FreePBX has both Node and PHP apps, and PM2 is just the way that we run Node apps in the background. And so this lets you see what Node apps are running. I think like some examples of that would be like UCP, the user control panel, or Zulu, things like that. There's also ring groups, which is for the ring group module. SIP settings, SIP station, and then sysadmin is another commercial module that we have, but this lets you do anything from activating your system, updating licensing, to setting your host name. Anything that like would probably require root to run can be done here, I think. And then let's see, the voicemail module, so you can enable voicemail, disable it, and fetch it. So let me present again. So when working with GraphQL and FreePBX, there's two kind of things you need to know about. There's really two main parts. There's OAuth authentication, which is how you log into it basically controls access, how you log into the API, and then the actual GraphQL APIs. And so I'm going to just go briefly over OAuth. I mean, OAuth is once again one of those things that can be very deep. So, I think we're just going to go over some basics, the basic use case for OAuth, and kind of talk about what it is. But OAuth is basically an open standard for access delegation. It's commonly used as a way for internet users to grant website application or with or without giving them passwords. If you ever use Google Authenticate or Google Login, this is OAuth. This is kind of the process that they use, where you go to an application and ask, hey, do you want to log in? And then you go to Google and it says, are you sure you want to log in? Give this information to the website. You say, sure, log me in. And then now you can access the application. Abstractly, so this is kind of like the most complicated use case for OAuth. It can actually be simpler than this, but for the most part, like I was saying, as an end user, the third-party app or whatever can say, I want to authorize. It sends it to the user, and that basically asks the user, do you want to log in? And you say yes, and then grant gets submitted to FreePBX. In this case, you're asking for, hey, give me access. It checks your credentials, and then an access token is passed to you. And what you do is you trade in this access token with the GraphQL server, and then that allows you to access any of the protected resources that are available to you under the GraphQL server. And so that's kind of why OAuth is important. You can't really do anything useful with GraphQL until you log in and get an access token. And so you have to, take that into consideration when you're working with GraphQL. So this is a little bit about OAuth again. There's several ways to set it up with FreePBX. There's the machine-to-machine, which is the server backend. And if I go back to this, the server-to-server is probably going to eliminate this first step. It would basically you'd have a username and password in the client, and then behind the scenes, it would go use a username and password to log in, which would then return an access token. And that's pretty much the use case we're probably going to go through and talk about throughout this entire presentation. But this is the simplest use case. The next one is the browser-based single-page application. Like if you were to have a single-page app like written in React or Angular, this would be a way for you to basically not have to go through the back-end server. You could basically have the React app go talk to the FreePBX instance, get the auth token, and then start using it to query against the APIs. And this allows you to get rid of your server backend and host it, maybe in a CDN or something like that. Another way is a native app, which would be like a desktop mobile application, stuff like that. And so, yeah, let me show you kind of how this works. Let's see if I got it. So when you log into FreePBX and you go to the dashboard, all of the API stuff for GraphQL is under this connectivity API. And when you click on it, you have a whole bunch of, basically the first thing you see is this add application. This is actually OAuth. This is I guess the first, I want to say the first 4 tabs have to do with setting up OAuth to configure it with whatever application that you want to create. So in this case, you can see we can do a web server app, a browser-based single-page app, a native app, and machine-to-machine app. And for this use case, we want to do a machine-to-machine app, which is just, I want to give it a username and password and get a token back. And so what you can do is just, create that and say my fancy app. This is for Extracon. And then of course you're gonna have to give it a allowed scope. If you have to specify a scope. In this case, we're just gonna do GraphQL. And the reason being is there's actually several different API platforms that are supported under OAuth. We've got the RESTful web service and then the GraphQL web service. So in this case, we want to give access to whoever has this token to the GraphQL. And when you do this, it actually gives you a token URL, a client ID, and a client secret. And so you can use this information to now go connect to this server and then start issuing GraphQL commands. So OAuth query examples. Okay, so I try to like just do this as simple as possible in curl, like using curl. So like the things in yellow are the things you probably want to replace. So in this case, the host name I was given, I would replace here, and then go to the API token URL. The grant type would be client credentials, and depending on what you selected, whether the machine or web app, this grant type would be different. Machine to machine is also known as client credentials in OAuth, so that's kind of why we're saying, hey, let's use this. The client ID would be the client ID that they gave us, and then the secret. And so once you plug in those values and issue curl, it returns back an access token. It'll tell you what kind it is, and then how long it's going to be valid. After 360 seconds, you're going to have to go do this again to get a new token because the old one's going to expire. And so you got a new auth token. And so one of the things that you need to do is remember, we're going to remember that huge string. So now on to GraphQL. So now that we've got that like token, that access token, we're going to come in here and then start using it to query GraphQL. So the first thing to know is like GraphQL really has two different types of GraphQL queries. There's like a standard GraphQL request, which is pretty much that follows the standard industry rules. And then we have this thing that is called long-running tasks. So that is the long-running task is something that's unique to FreePBX. It's still using standard GraphQL. It's just that the tasks are running in the background and are not going to return any data. And we'll go over kind of some examples of what that is in the future. So here's where we use that access token that we generated a few minutes ago. So on a standard GraphQL request, we'll just post to the GraphQL endpoint. You just fill in a host name, and then we basically tell it what we want it to return, and we plug in our access token from OAuth. In this case, the actual query that we're using is right here. We can do fetch installed modules from that. And if you're trying to like figure out how to like create a query, you can actually come in here into the GraphQL Explorer. You can reload the Explorer, and in this case, you can see here's a query that I created. And I'm just going to delete this to kind of show you how it works. But so the first thing you can do is like if you can choose if you want a query or a mutation, and then we're going to like look for like as you type, it'll actually all the various APIs are kind of available, and so you can see like if you don't know what you're looking for, you can kind of use this as a playground, and you could say, okay, I want to fetch my host name. And then once you do that, you've got like all of the different fields that you can do in here. I think that's all I kind of want to do. And once you've got that kind of going, you can actually, let me just do that. Go back there. You can then execute it, and it'll tell you, it'll send you their data that has a response. And so I think in this, I'm doing that. No, I'm doing fetch installed modules. So anyway, I'm doing a different API in the example, but whatever. So once you submit this, once again, this is with curl, you can see it's a post. So you basically send a post that URL, and then the query is in the body, and it will return the data. In this case, the fetch installed modules, and it'll be a list of modules. So this is the way that we do standard. Long-running tests, they work just like the standard GraphQL request, but require two separate GraphQL requests. The first one was going to return a transaction ID, and that can be used to look up the status of the task to see what is completed. We typically use this for system tasks that take a long time to run, example, upgrading all modules. So here's an example of a long-running task. You can see it's very similar to the first one that we did. It just is basically the only difference is we have a transaction ID on it. So we have to make sure that we specify the transaction ID so we can get that back to clear for it later. And then, of course, when you do this, it gives you the status. It says, okay, the transaction has been initialized. Use the fetch API status API with the return transaction ID. In this case, we've got an ID of 24. And so now we have the second request. And what we'll do is we can use this to poll the results. And so once again, we fill in our host name, our access token, and then the transaction ID that we got from the previous step. And then using the fetch API status, it will basically tell us the status of the query. And so as far as the results are displayed in the message. You're looking for like an executed. That means it's been completed. If it's still executing and waiting, it's going to say processing. And of course, if it failed to work, it's going to say failed. And so you can use this to see, did my API complete, and or how am I doing? But wait, okay, so so I just have a little surprise. So this is kind of the first time that we've actually had a client created. So this is kind of the official release of the unofficial FreePBX GraphQL client. And what I did is I wrote this and you can visit on our GitHub. But this is a GraphQL client for FreePBX basically supports Node. And so it's basically supports Node version 10 and above. It has support for CommonJS and ESM scripts like MJS, and supports both OAuth and GraphQL out of the box. We also have it so it'll automatically reconnect if there's like a network error or stuff like that. So it makes it a little bit nicer to deal with. And it also has built-in support for long-running tasks. So some of the issues, though, is it only supports the machine-to-machine OAuth right now. I hope to someday support React and Angular, or at least the sign in from a web browser. And then also there's a way that you can sign in from the CLI as well. I hope to support those one of these days, but I have to start somewhere. A machine-to-machine seems like the best use case right now, or at least the ones that most people will do. So we went to do that. And then, unfortunately, we don't support TypeScript at this time. Hopefully, hope to have that soon. So to basically start with it, it's just basically npm I FreePBX-GraphQL client. And then the basic usage of it is, once you've got that installed, is you can come in here and define it, and then query, like you execute your query, and that's pretty much it. And I'm gonna go through an example of how to do this. So, excuse me. I'm gonna make my directory. I'm just gonna call this like HashCon Demo. I'm gonna init npm package name version on demo. Point test command. Yes. So we've created my project now. The next thing I'm going to do is basically install the FreePBX GraphQL client. This will go and install the library. And then after I've got it installed, I can launch my little editor. I guess I trust them. Of course, I do it myself. I'm going to create a new file. This is, let's see, I'm going to call this like demo.js. And so what I can do is I'm just going to go ahead and, okay, go away. I'm going to go ahead and define like how we do it. Let's see, FreePBX, QL clients, and then I'm going to need the GQL library as well, and then that should be. You can see code. You can see CodePilot is suggesting it's trying to learn it, but it doesn't quite know how this works yet. So it recommends some off things. I think that's right. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna like do the base URL of the FreePBX instance, and if I go back to my thing, I'm gonna go back to my applications where I have my fancy app. And I'm going to view it. Let me regenerate the credentials real quick. I can take the URL. What I'm really looking for is this. I don't know why that says 2443, but it's probably a bug. Anyway, I'm going to take this as my base URL right here, which is basically this is running on this host name. And here's the port numbers that it's using. I'm going to do const. Let's see. I want to do client ID. And I'm going to come back and get the client ID from this, which is that. And then const client secret. Secret from my API. And then So the next thing I'm going to do is configure it. So I need to have my config. Wait, what am I doing? Const config equal to client and then ID. We'll have ID, client ID, and then secret. Secret, there you go. And then of course, I'm going to come in here and there's a couple of options that you can control, like you can control retries and other stuff. And so what I'm going to do is just enable debug so we get some text output. The other thing is most of this basically supports promises out of the box. So we're going to need to like have like we're going to have an asynchronous function. And then in here, main is fine. Main over here, down here, so it executes, and then finally, it's not exit. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to execute the main. And so the first thing I'm going to do is create a new client for GraphQL. And it uses, how about that? Copilot actually worked. So I have client equals the new GraphQL client up here. And then in the config. So this is actually creates a new client. The next thing I want to do is I want to create my query. And so we use this GraphQL object or GQL object up here so that we can issue spaces. Man, Copilot is just like filling it in for me today. So yeah, I want to do a query. And so I'm going to come back here. I'm going to just play around with what I want. So I think I had like fetch host name. So once again, this returns when we were playing around with it, we had this and it fetches this. So I'm going to come back in here and let's see, just do that. And then so that's how we write the query in that. And then now we have Copilot's wrong there. So now we're going to create the client and or actually we're going to use to request the client to run it and then console.log the results. So let me come back to my thing right here. I've got, you can see I got demo, and then I'll just run it. So before I run it, let me just kind of look at it so everybody can see what we're doing or just kind of go over it. So this section up here, I just defined all of the connection information. And then down here, I'm running this main function, defining the GraphQL client, and then executing the query. And this should wait. The wait here will tell JavaScript to wait for the response to happen and then log any results. So once again, I'll just do no demo. And you can see there's the results. And so it makes it pretty simple to start creating apps against it. And you can see that they match. Now we've got the same thing only for transactions. Transactions is basically, you can see it's very similar. The only thing is we've got a new request that's called request transaction and wait. And what this does is it will request the transaction and then wait on it to complete either with a failed state or a successful state. If it completes in a failed state, it will throw an error. So then you can just check the error or whatever. So if the other thing to note is if you come in here and just run the if you were to just do request, it'll, and actually I'll just give you an example. It will actually just do the request. So and it won't. Yeah. So let me just do that. So this is a mutation since we're going to update the system modules. So I think it's like upgrade all modules. And then when we do this, of course, you've got to have status, message, and then transaction. And then, of course, let me do this. Oh, no, cancel. Work? Yeah, looks like it's going to work. Yeah, so you can see that Oh, okay. So this is not right. Mutations always require an input. Even if you don't have anything, in this case, upgrade all modules doesn't really have any input, but you still have to go and define it. And so like now you can see that this worked correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this GraphQL query that we just wrote here. I'm going to replace it here. And I'm going to do, instead of dot request, I'm going to do dot request transaction and wait. And what you can see is now it'll actually just wait for the transaction to complete, and when it's done, it'll tell us. It does take a while to upgrade all the modules, so that's why it's taken some time. Yeah, and so now you can see that it finally executed successfully, and it gave us a positive result. So that's pretty much how the transactions work. Let's see, and that's pretty much all I've got. I thank you for everybody that watched this presentation, and if you have any questions about GraphQL or anything, you can feel free to reach out to me in brooks@sangoma.com. And then also you can follow me on Twitter at @AuBeMatt. And thank you very much.